Alright my friends, it's time for another look at fake history. You may have seen my video on the fake history of Saladin where I pointed out that although much extolled in the West for magnanimous and even chivalrous behavior, the Kurdish Sultan was what we would call today, and at the sake of using an anachronism, a radical Muslim who persecuted, enslaved, and beheaded Christians, including for not embracing Islam. Now let's look at a similar but much lesser known example of this phenomenon of Westerners gushing over what are otherwise fanatical Muslims. Enter Muhammad bin Dawud Chaghri. Although he is better known today as Alp Arslan, a Turkish honorific that means brave lion, for the remainder of this video I will refer to him by his given name, Muhammad. This Muhammad, born in 1033, was Sultan of the Seljuk Turks from 1063 to 1072. And the Seljuk Turks were the one Muslim group that committed so many atrocities throughout Asia Minor and the Holy Land, slaughtering and enslaving tens if not hundreds of thousands of Christians and desecrating and torching thousands of churches, all of which culminated in the calling of the First Crusade. According to Muslim sources, Sultan Muhammad, was a fundamentalist. Nizam al-Mulk, his vizier, and a formidable man himself, said of the young sultan, "He was exceedingly imperious, and because he was so earnest and fanatical in his beliefs and disapproved of the Shafi'i rite, I lived in constant fear of him." Shafi'i rite is one of 4 approved schools of Sunni law, madhab, singular. Even so, the vizier is saying that Sultan Muhammad, who followed the Hanafi madhab, was so intolerant of any opposing schools of thought, even though they were fully approved by Islam, that he terrified his own vizier. How then would Sultan Muhammad, Alp Arslan, have felt about Christians? We shall soon see. As an example of his many exploits, soon after becoming Sultan between 1064 and 1065, Muhammad besieged Ani, the capital of Armenia. Once inside, his Muslim warriors, armed with 2 knives in each hand and an extra one in their mouths, according to sources, began to mercilessly slaughter the inhabitants of the entire city and pile up their bodies one on top of the other before torturing it. The sources talk about innumerable boys and girls with bright and pretty faces being carried off into slavery with their mothers. The main source is Matthew of Edessa. But the most savage treatment was always reserved for those visibly proclaiming their Christianity. Clergy and monks were burned to death while others were flayed alive from head to toe, all on Sultan Muhammad's orders. Every monastery and church, before this, Ani was known as the City of 1,001 Churches, was pillaged, desecrated, and set aflame. Crosses were ritually broken, except for a large gilded one, which Muhammad sent to the Caliph in Baghdad as a trophy of war or of jihad. Not only do several Christian sources document the sack of Armenia's capital, Ani, one contemporary succinctly notes that Muhammad, quote, rendered Ani a desert by massacres and fire, end quote. But so do Muslim sources, often in apocalyptic terms. "I wanted to enter the city and see it with my own eyes," one Arab said. "I tried to find a street without having to walk over the corpses, but that was impossible." And that's from Alfred Friendly's book, The Dreadful Day. Little wonder that, for contemporary Christians, Sultan Muhammad was, quote, like a beast crazed by its bloodthirsty nature, a drinker of blood, a venomous serpent, a ferocious animal, to quote again from Matthew of Edessa's Chronicle. For the Greek Michael Adalaides, a contemporary of Sultan Muhammad, Muhammad was simply, quote, the Antichrist, unquote. Due to Sultan Muhammad's ravaging of Christian territory, before long the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, responded in the person of Emperor Romanus Diogenes IV. He led a large army to meet and fight Muhammad's forces near Manzikert in 1071. Chapter 4 of my Sword and Scimitar is devoted to that battle. Not only was it a catastrophic defeat for the Christians, but Romanos became the first Roman emperor in over 1,000 years to experience the ignominy of being captured on the field of battle. And here's where things get very interesting. Sultan Muhammad ended up releasing Romanos in exchange for a huge ransom. And because of this, all that is remembered today of Sultan Muhammad, this drinker of Christian blood, this blood-crazed beast, this Antichrist, is that he was, wait for it, magnanimous and chivalrous. Sound familiar? Now, rather than comb through my library for quotes asserting Muhammad's magnanimity, and these are many if memory does not fail me, I decided to try out this ChatGPT by asking it, which authors say Alp Arslan was magnanimous for releasing Romanos? And it gave me several examples, including the following. Stephen Runciman. In his famous work, The History of the Crusades, Runciman refers to Alp Arslan's release of Romanos as an act of magnanimity. He highlights that despite the Byzantine emperor being captured after a significant defeat, Alp Arslan showed mercy by sparing him rather than executing him, which was common practice in such situations at the time. It also gave me Alan Palmer. In The Decline and Fall of the Ottoman Empire, Palmer refers to Alp Arslan's release of Romanos as an example of chivalry and noble conduct, in contrast to the often brutal nature of medieval warfare. David Nicole, in his book, The Crusades, A Short History, Nicole discusses the event and notes that Alp Arslan's decision, that's why I like to just call him Muhammad, to release Romanos was likely motivated by political calculation. Oh, good for him. But also an act of magnanimity that contrasted with the harsher norms of warfare at the time. It also gave me Bernard Lewis, the renowned historian of the Middle East. In his book, The Middle East, A Brief History of the Last 2,000 Years, briefly touches upon the release of Romanos and suggests that Alp Arslan's act demonstrated generosity and wisdom. I also asked ChatGPT directly, was Alp Arslan magnanimous to Romanos Diogenes after the Battle of Manzikert in 1071? And this is how it responded. Yes, Alp Arslan, the Seljuk Sultan, demonstrated magnanimity towards Romanos IV Diogenes, the Byzantine emperor, after the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. Despite the overwhelming victory of the Seljuk forces, Alp Arslan acted with relative mercy toward the defeated Romanos, which is often cited as an example of his magnanimity. Rather than executing him or imprisoning him for life, Alp Arslan reportedly treated Romanos with respect and dignity. He is said to have had a respectful conversation with the emperor, asking for his well-being and offering him generous treatment. However, after Romanos was released and returned to Constantinople, his own court turned against him and he was eventually deposed, blinded, and imprisoned. Alp Arslan's mercy therefore did not directly lead to a positive outcome for Romanos, but it was certainly a magnanimous gesture in contrast to the ruthless norms of medieval warfare. The event reflects Alp Arslan's character and political approach, showing a level of compassion and respect toward an enemy which stands out in history as an example of chivalric conduct. All right, that's enough of that. Now back to some serious facts. There are two fundamental problems with these claims that I just read to you. First, although much has been made by Western historians concerning Sultan Muhammad's apparent magnanimity, in fact, it completely accorded with Sharia, Islamic law, which requires Muslim leaders to dispense with captives in whichever one of three ways best serves Islam's interests. 1, execution. 2, slavery. 3, freedom, often by ransoming. Now, considering that the Sultan's Fatimid Shia rivals were launching devastating raids on his southern domains, and that the execution of the Christians' emperor would likely provoke a renewed Roman offensive, whereas clemency to Romanos might ease hostilities and fill the Seljuks' coffers with money, Muhammad wisely concluded on release for ransom. Even Romanos himself had shrewdly told the Sultan that, quote, killing me will not be of any use to you, end quote. So in and of itself, there was nothing magnanimous in Muhammad's release of Romanos for ransom. Based on the circumstances, it was by far the best of Muhammad's options, allowing tensions with the Christians to ease so the Turks could focus on the Shia Fatimids, and filling their war chests with much needed gold. The second and even bigger problem here is that while Muslim accounts do confirm that Muhammad released the emperor, they make abundantly clear that there was nothing magnanimous about it. Quite the opposite. According to this book, Turkish Myth and Muslim Symbol, The Battle of Manzikert by Carol Hillenbrand, the following are all quotes from Muslim sources as to how Muhammad actually treated the Christian emperor. You are too trivial in my view for me to kill you, the Sultan is said to have said to Romanos before his Turks. Take him to the person who pays most. When no one was reportedly interested in purchasing the dog of the Romans, as he's called, Muhammad scoffed that that was because the dog is better than he is. Dog, by the way, is one of Islam's main epithets for Christians. The Muslim chronicles in that book also say that Muhammad struck him 3 or 4 blows with his hand, and when Romanos collapsed on the floor, he kicked him a similar number of times. He put him in chains and fettered his hand to his neck. He pulled his hair and put his face to the ground while informing him, "You and your troops are food for the Muslims," and so on. Meanwhile, and if you will recall, ChatGPT said this: Alp Arslan reportedly treated Romanos with respect and dignity. He is said to have had a respectful conversation with the emperor, asking for his well-being and offering him generous treatment. Alp Arslan's mercy was certainly a magnanimous gesture in contrast to the ruthless norms of medieval warfare. The event reflects Alp Arslan's character and political approach, showing a level of compassion and respect toward an enemy which stands out in history and is as an example of chivalric conduct. So there it is, yet another example of fake history, and as with Saladin's fake history, it too is dedicated to transforming a jihadist Muslim war leader into a paragon of magnanimity. Enjoy.